Calling out Hollywood, GLAAD releases its annual report on LGBTQ plus representation on screen. Plus, trans star Jamie Clayton gives us an inside look at the L-word Generation Q. And switching busts, what the Capitol is doing to honor civil rights leader and Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Welcome to Advocate Today. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist. Survivors of the Club Q mass shooting testified on Capitol Hill. 5 people were killed and 19 others were injured in the November shooting at the LGBTQ plus nightclub in Colorado Springs. The survivors detailed their experiences that night before the House Oversight and Reform Committee, and they directly tied Republicans' rhetoric to the massacre at the Colorado LGBTQ plus nightclub.
To the politicians and activists who accuse LGBTQ people of grooming children and being abusers, shame on you. As leaders of our country, it is your obligation to represent all of us, not just the ones you happen to agree with. Hate speech turns into hate action, and actions based on hate almost took my life from me at 25 years old. I beg you all to consider your words before you speak them, for someone may use those words to justify action that may take someone's life.
As Washington, D.C. comes to grips with the rise of anti-LGBTQ plus hate and violence, Hollywood is being held accountable when it comes to on-screen representation. The LGBTQ plus advocacy organization GLAAD released its annual Studio Responsibility Index. The report maps the quality, quantity, and diversity of queer characters in films released by the 7 major studios. This year's report found that LGBTQ plus inclusive films declined from the last year, along with racial diversity and screen time. GLAAD found that out of 77 films released by the 7 major studios in 2021, 20.8% of them contained LGBTQ plus characters. This is a 2% drop from the previous year. The report also saw a decrease in lesbian and bisexual representation. Racial diversity of LGBTQ plus characters also dropped year over year to 39%. And only 7 of the 28 LGBTQ plus characters accounted for only clocked in over 10 minutes of screen time. And for the second year in a row, none of the characters had a disability. But for the first time in 5 years, there was a transgender character in a major film release. That was the character Anybody's from West Side Story. Overall, all 7 studios receive insufficient, poor, or failing grades. For more results from the report, you can visit advocate.com. While the Hollywood studios struggle to promote LGBTQ plus visibility, one TV series has long been an institution of providing relatable, real-world experiences to the queer community. The L-Word Generation Q features a cast of powerful queer characters with the background of sunny Southern California. And trans actress Jamie Clayton is helping to move the needle for representation with her character Tess. I connected with the star about the season, providing much needed visibility and more. Because this is my first time interviewing you in all these years, I really want to ask you your origin story with the L word, your first kind of awareness of it as something in the world. And I mean, even, going back almost 20 years now.
I mean, I was a fan of the original. So I've watched the original all the way through, I think maybe 3 times. And yeah. And when they announced, this new version of the show, it was a funny thing. It was on social media when the fans from Sense8, because Sense8 had just ended, fans, were like, okay, we need Jamie on the L word. And so I reached out to my team and I said, can we look into this? Like, what, do we have a script? Have you seen it? Do you what's happening with this? And my manager, Lisa Wright, who's amazing, she got a script, which we weren't supposed to get. And I read it and I loved it. And I was like, I want to do this. And so I went in and I auditioned for a different part and then was brought back in for Tess, who had a different name. And it was a much smaller part. And then here we are, series regular, 3 seasons later.
Well done. As a fan of the original L word, as are Hugh, we know that there were things that were not done the way they should have been, or, entirely, like with trans characters and with bisexuality, for instance. But now Generation Q is really changing that and, featuring kind of wider group of LGBTQ plus people. And would you talk a little bit about being a part of this storytelling that is even more inclusive than the original L Word was?
I mean, I think that the writers and Marja, in creating the show have just done such a really good job at creating a world that like the world that we all live in. I mean, it looks like the world that I live in. It looks like my friend group, I think it's really special and it's really fun, and different people with, different identities and different ideas and different, it's just really reflective of the world that I think that what queer spaces look like now.
Yeah, 100%. You also, Tess, is also a part of another piece of the community, which is the recovery community. And I think the show does a really great job of showing that it's across the spectrum. There's not just one person in recovery on this show. Would you talk a little bit about being a part of that and how critical that is to LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. And when I knew that Tess was sober, and working the program and working the steps and doing those things, I mean, I was very intentional with my research and with, speaking to friends. I have, many friends that are in recovery, and
Mhm.
it's been around in me and part of my world for as long as I can remember. And so I've been very intentional, with creating conversations with the writers about, like, let's show her going to a meeting, like, let's show,
Mhm.
just like having those things be a part of her life.
Yeah.
Like one of the great scenes in, this first episode with Finley towards the end is when we see Finley at the meeting, and the camera sort of pans around and you see the people in the room and they don't all look like, her, and they don't all look like us when we go to these rooms, but we all have, there's the common thread there
Yeah.
where that we can relate to. And I think that with queer communities as a whole, I mean, substance abuse is so prevalent because we live in a world that tells us that we don't deserve to be here. And so, numbing that pain away is something that is all too familiar, I think, in queer spaces. And so I'm really pleased that I get to show, someone who's in recovery and who's working the steps and doing that. But yeah, it's not like recovery isn't linear. It doesn't look the same for everybody. There are, slip ups. Tess had a slip up season 1. Who knows what's going to happen with Tess in the future. But recovery is up and down, and it's messy, and it's not the same for everybody, and it's not easy for everybody, and that's okay.
Mhm. Yes, little compassion. You have to have compassion. You also have this great storyline with Tessa's mom and caring for her, which is something that a lot of people at a certain age begin to go through. Jamie, thank you very much for this. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. If there's something else you would like to say about the L Word or anything else you have in the works, I wanted to give you that chance.
Oh my gosh, you're so sweet. I mean, at the premiere screening last night at the Semi-Tropic at the Dana's night, Marja said something in her introduction that I thought was really smart and really fun. And, she was talking about queer content and supporting queer content, and queer writers and queer actors and the whole thing. And she said, we watch these shows because we love them and we hate them, and we're allowed to hate them, and we're allowed to hate moments that happen, but like love the project overall, but like hate characters and hate certain
Mhm.
storylines, and because we do that with all shows, so let's do it with ours too. Love it, hate it, get into it, talk about it. Like, yes.
Right. Right. I love that. Well, Jamie Clayton, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. And
Thank you so
congratulations.
much.
Of course. Thank you to Jamie for that conversation. Episodes of the L Word Generation Q are streaming now on Showtime. The House approved a bill that would swap out busts of 2 former Supreme Court justices. A bust of former Chief Justice Roger Taney would be replaced by one of Justice Thurgood Marshall in the old Supreme Court chamber of the U.S. Capitol building. Taney authored the majority opinion in the infamous Dred Scott case. Thurgood Marshall was the first Black Supreme Court justice and an advocate for civil rights. Dred Scott versus Sanford was the 1857 decision that established neither enslaved nor free African Americans were citizens of the U.S. and therefore not protected by the Constitution. The ruling remained law until it was overturned by the 13th and 14th Amendments in the 1860s. The bill to swap the bus already passed the Senate and now goes to President Biden for his signature. Thank you for joining me on this Advocate today. Advocating for equality and marginalized communities is our mission. Open the Advocate channel whenever you stream for more advocacy content and coverage. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist, and I'll see you next time.